In this video, we'll talk about the way that fiscal policy affects aggregate demand. Fiscal policy sets the level of government spending and taxation. In the United States, Congress has the constitutional authority to manage fiscal policy. Let me emphasize, the Fed runs monetary policy and Congress fiscal policy. Expansionary fiscal policy increases government expenditures or reduces taxes or both. Contractionary fiscal policy, on the other hand, increases government expenditures or reduces taxes or both. It may seem simple at first. If you want to spur the economy, just engage expansionary monetary fiscal policy and you're done. But reality is a bit more complicated than that. There are two economic effects that will determine the effectiveness of fiscal policy, the multiplier effect and the crowding out effect. Let's go through both of them in detail. To understand the multiplier effect, let's work through an example. If the government buys $20 billion worth of plane from Boeing, Boeing's revenue increases $20 billion. Eventually, revenues are distributed to Boeing's workers as wages and owners as profits or stock dividends. Workers and owners are also consumers and will spend a portion of the extra income. This extra consumption causes further increase in aggregate demand, and the cycle starts. Income and consumption in turn, and so forth. The multiplier effect is that additional shift in aggregate demand that results when fiscal policy increases income and thereby increases consumer spending. The amount of fiscal intervention needed in the economy depends on the size of this multiplier effect. So how big is the multiplier effect? The size of the multiplier effect depends on households' marginal propensity to consume, or MPC. Households who receive additional income will spend some of it. The ratio of the increase in consumption, delta C, to the increase in income, delta Y, is that measure. If MPC equals 0.8, households who see their income raised by $100 will spend $80. So now that we know what marginal propensity to consume is, we can use it to get an estimate of the overall change in real GDP caused by a one-time change in government expenditures. Some important assumption here. We will assume that investment and net exports do not change or respond when government increases expenditures. So changing government expenditures will only affect consumption and income. That may be relaxed later, but for the purpose of this video, let's just keep them unchanged. So as notation goes, delta G is the change in government expenditures, and delta Y and delta C are the ultimate changes in income and consumption respectively. So we can start with our national income identity, right, and then change it to a change notation, to the delta notation. And what that says is that the change in income is eventually caused by an overall change in consumption and government expenditures. Remember, because investment and net exports do not change, there are no changes in those variables. We know that the change in consumption is equal to the change in income multiplied by the marginal propensity to consume. Just remember, that comes from the definition of the marginal propensity to consume. So now all that we need to do is solve for delta Y to get the multiplier effect. And what it says is that the eventual change, or the overall change in real GDP, is equal to this multiplier times the initial change in government expenditures. And the multiplier is defined as 1 divided by 1 minus the marginal propensity to consume. As you might have imagined, the size of the multiplier depends on the marginal propensity to consume. The bigger the marginal propensity to consume, the larger the multiplier. I hope that's intuitive. The multiplier measures the cycle of income and consumption we described before. A larger marginal propensity to consume makes the cycle steps larger every time. These larger steps translates into a bigger effect overall. So that is the multiplier effect. Now let's talk about the other effect, in fact that works in the opposite direction of the multiplier, and that is the crowding out effect. Well, government expenditures, right, just like in our example before, with the increasing in government expenditure in Boeing airplanes by 20 billion, will increase also the demand for money. That increase in the demand for money will result in an equilibrium interest rate that is higher than it would be in the absence of that expenditure. That increase in interest rates is also increasing the cost of borrowing, and that will reduce aggregate demand through a reduction in investment. So think about the crowding out effect as the drag of a vehicle that is going down the freeway. Of course, the engine is trying to push you forward, or the multiplier effect, and the crowding out effect is holding you back. So, now that you've learned about the crowding out and the multiplier effect, let's do an active learning exercise. Please submit your answers on Top Hat. In this scenario, the economy is in a recession, and shifting the aggregate demand curve to the right by roughly 200 billion would end the recession. I want you to assume that the marginal propensity to consume is 0.8, and there is no crowding out for scenario A. How much should Congress increase government expenditures to end the recession? Now for scenario B, imagine that there is crowding out. Imagine how much would government expenditures need to increase or decrease from the scenario A to again end the recession. Please submit your answers on Top Hat, and we will review the answers in class. So far, we've discussed the effect of government expenditures. Changes in taxes can also have an effect in output through its own multiplier effect. As an example, suppose the government reduces taxes. This policy increases household take-home pay, which in turn increases income for companies around the economy. This is the beginning of the same cycle that we started, or we described in a previous slide, by an increase in expenditures. Companies pay employees and owners who increase their consumption, and so forth. As with the expenditures multiplier, the overall effect of a tax reduction on aggregate demand depends on the marginal propensity to consume and the crowding out effect. Just before we finish this video, I would like to highlight an important fact about fiscal policy. Just like the Fed and monetary policy, Congress has influence on aggregate demand, but not complete control. They're only the first movers. The overall effect on the economy depends on what firms and households choose to do. For example, if following an increase in government expenditures, Boeing decides to capitalize their earnings instead of distributing them, then the multiplier effect will be much smaller. This link between government expenditures and consumption is broken. Similarly, households and firms' perceptions on the timing of a tax cut might influence the size of the multiplier and the multiplier cycle. If households believe that tax cuts are temporary, they're likely to save all their tax cuts to pay taxes in the future. This will stop the multiplier effect on its tracks. On the other hand, a perception that the tax cut is permanent will result in increases in consumption and a larger multiplier effect. Just remember, the government can influence the economy, but not control it.